Hi, my name is Andy Van Zant. I'm a professional board game developer, and I'm taking a look at older board game titles through the lens of modern development. And it's important to keep in mind when I'm talking about these games, what I'm saying is usually not intended to be criticism, but rather to compare and contrast the choices that were made in the past versus choices you might make for a more modern market. Today, I'm going to take a look at Grave Business, which was designed by me, so take anything I say with a grain of salt, and put out by Minion Games in 2011. Um, the first thing we'll take a look at is the packaging here. Uh, the cover illustration was done by Chuck Whelan, who's a comic book artist. I think he did a good job. I like the full bleed cover, and it expresses what's going on in the game through the illustration. You're gathering body parts to put together zombies to send them out to do your bidding. I would still tone down the gruesomeness of some of these elements just a little bit if I was to make adjustments today. Um, Also down here at the bottom, you'll notice there's some boxware, and that's a result of the linen texture that's on the box. I've mentioned in the past that linen texture is a thing that adds perceived value, but it actually tends to be worse for products in the long run. Uh, Linen texture tends to show wear much more quickly than regular flat matte texture. And so I would probably do a matte texture on this box instead. I like linen texture on things that you hold in your hand constantly, like cards, because then the tactile feel is there, the perceived value is very obvious. But this, you're not going to be doing that really with the box so much. If we take a look at the side of the box, there's no player count or age range information. So that's something that I would change. When people pick up a box, that's usually the first thing they do is turn to the side to look for that information. It's good though that it's on the back of the box at least, but I would still have it on the sides as well. The blurb at the top is concise, it conveys theme, and it conveys mechanics. So I like the blurb, and I like that there's a component shot with additional illustrations on it, so it shows you what's going on in the game. So the back in general, I like. I think I don't really have any criticisms there. If we take a look inside, we've got a rulebook, and here's where my bias will certainly show in that while I didn't lay this out, I wrote all these words in this order. So this is still the way I would do it. The number of rules questions that have come up have been comparatively minor, so I am pretty happy with the overall rule book. The layout is good as well. I would change one thing about it though. The If you made the rulebook as tall as the box and removed this border, we could move it from an 8-page rulebook to a 4-page rulebook, which makes the rules easier to reference in the long run. Um, if we look at the boards here, we've got this main board here. The spaces are clearly delineated, and we've got reminder text on the spaces and on the edges here. So it's very functional, as well as having the illustrative elements still in place. So I like that. Uh, you'll notice the edges are wrapped here, and I like that for the main board. We've got player boards here as well that also have the edges wrapped, and I wouldn't do that. I would leave those edges bare like this, the chipboard edges on the mausoleum board, because I think that it is more expected for that edge wrapping on the main board than it is on the player boards. The player boards are also good at doing what they need to do. Uh, you've got your necromancer image here, and it's different for each player, and that's also color coded. The tombstones and their lab are also themed around that. And when we get to the player tokens, the tokens are color coded to the player, but also their zombies are thematically tuned towards the necromancer that's shown. So it's a secondary indicator of color on the pieces that belong to this particular necromancer. So it's both functional and thematic. The things I would change are actually the way the component was done with wrapping the edges, and I would remove the linen texture. Just assume that I would remove the linen texture from all of this. We've got the mausoleum board and the start player marker, and they explain what they do, and they've got reminder text on both of them. So again, it's functional, and you'll notice that all of the places where you can send a zombie worker have that blue glowing text, so consistency, even though the worker placement spaces are spread amongst the different components, it's still very clear where they're supposed to go. If we take a look at these tokens, and let me bring back a player board to put things on. If we take a look at the tokens, we've got the value clearly printed on them. They are also color coded, and the illustrations are clearly different between the loot that you dig up and the body parts that you dig up. So it's functional. If we take a look at the back of these, there's a bevel as well as the logo of the game. Logo is fine. The bevel is not. The bevel makes it much more obvious that when the tile is slightly off center, and it's normal for things to be, between 1 and 3 millimeters off. And when you're talking about something that's only an inch across or so, that can be a big difference. A lot of times, if an illustration is roughly centered on a token, it being a couple millimeters off is less noticeable. But if you put those parallel lines from that bevel on it, it's much easier to notice when something is slightly off because you have a comparison point. You've got the distance between the parallel line and the edge here is bigger than the distance between the parallel line and the edge here, and your eye will grab onto that very quickly. So I would get rid of that bevel. As well as the linen texture. The insert here is a plain white insert designed to stop box rattle and protect components during shipping. It is not designed for aftermarket storage, so it's the same as most white inserts, and so it's fine. There are two things I would change mechanically in the game. I'm still happy with the game and proud of what it does in general. It accomplished what I set out for it to do. I would still make changes for the modern market. One of those changes is that in the game there is attacking and stealing, which is not normally a hallmark of Euro-style games. And this is a Euro-style game. It's a worker placement game with a spatial auction in it. At the time when I designed this, I had designed several games that were trying to use directed aggression in a different way, in a more Euro-style way, where it wasn't the thrust of the game. It was something that sometimes it was a good idea to do it, sometimes it was not, and you had to discern when the right opportunity was. The problem is if you sit down at a table of 4 people and 2 of them see attacking and stealing and say, that's totally for me, that's my kind of thing, and just sit there and do that over and over again without paying attention to how good the action is or not, everybody at the table will think that's what the game is about. They'll think it's a very take that game, even though it's not. And so I would make the disparity between the two, between when it's good and when it's bad, much wider. So a little more rewarding when it's good and a lot more negative when it's bad, so that it was just clear cut from the get-go that it's not always good to do this. So that's that. I would also change these. These are the pieces of the master. And during the game, at the end of the game, normally you would score points based on your treasure that you had dug up, and the player with the most points wins. Unless one player has all 3 pieces of the master in their lab at the end of the game. This is normally very hard to accomplish. People can stop you from digging it up in the graveyard to begin with, and then even if you get all 3 pieces into your lab, other people can steal them from you. So as long as players are paying attention, pretty difficult to accomplish. They still need to pay attention though, and that's where the problem is that if you got a couple players who are kind of in their own zone and only paying attention to their own board, and you reach the end of the game and somebody's like, hey, I got all 3 pieces of the master, they're like, oh, okay. And so I would change the way they work slightly. I would, instead of being an outright victory, I would make them have an intrinsic value. I'd make it be if you have 1, you've got 1 point. If you have 2, it's 5 points. If you have 3, it's 20 points or 30 points or something like that. So that not only does it have a more concrete number to what it is rather than just win or not win, it also has a value that other players might still seek out those pieces even if they aren't going for that particular victory condition. It's possible I might also add a fourth one in there and have the scaling be a little more granular. Um, So that's grave business. To recap, I would adjust the gruesomeness of the art a little bit. I would, on the cover in particular, I would remove the linen texture from everything. I would put the player information on the sides of the box. I wouldn't wrap the edges of these boards. I would get rid of the bevel on the back of these tokens, and I would adjust the mechanics slightly for the pieces of master and the directed aggression. And then I would bring the rulebook down to a 4-page rulebook. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.